Hey, welcome back to the Eagle Insight podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Jim DeLapp. He's a retired Army colonel and with an impressive career spanning Corps of Engineers, the private sector, public sector as a director of public works in the city of Mobile, Alabama, which is a fantastic town if you've never been there. And he's now president and CEO of J.A. DeLapp and Associates, which is a full-service consulting firm headquartered in Mobile. Jim, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, happy to be here, Bob. Congratulations on what you're doing, and really excited to talk about all kinds of leadership things today.
Thanks, man. So look, you were a leader in many aspects, from a platoon leader all the way up to a commander of a premier engineer district in the Corps of Engineers. You have been leading people in some way or another almost continuously for about 3 decades. And then one day you hung it up. It was time to go, and you were leaving the service. So how clear were you when you were leaving the service about what it is you were supposed to do with the rest of your life after you got out of those many leadership roles?
Well, first of all, it was, a lot of time in service, and thankfully in that service, the military did a great job developing leadership along the way. And that's one of the probably best things about the military. You really don't understand it when you're doing it, but as you reflect on it and you look back, you realize how valuable that was over the 30, years of service, 25 of which, in the Army. But, how clear was I? It was one of those things that was really more about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to spend my time. I jokingly say not have to ask for permission to take a few days off. So it was, but at the end of the day, leadership's still involved in everything we do. And the consulting company that I stood up really has leadership at the core of it as well, and helping folks who need assistance in that area. So that's just one of the aspects. But it's the transition was more of a personal nature, but by no means do you leave the leadership stuff behind, and you really lean on that every day.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I still my platoon sergeant's voice echoes in my mind almost daily as he coached me. And for those of you not familiar with the structure there, when you're a brand new officer and you get put in charge of your first formation, there is a grizzled older non-commissioned officer who's assigned to help you get through your first assignment as a leader, and they offer you advice if you're willing to listen, and it's incredibly important. Sergeant First Class Terry Purdon, if you're out there, it helped shape how I thought about leadership. And I don't think there's an equivalent of that in most of the civilian world, certainly not within the public sector civilian world. And I think very seldom do you see that in a private sector civilian world.
Yeah, no, that's right. And we all have those same experiences. And, whether it was your platoon sergeant or first sergeant or, sergeant major, I was fortunate to spend a lot of time in the Army Corps, and you don't have that military senior non-commissioned officer, but you had a senior civilian that you leaned on. And I was blessed to have really great senior civilians in all the jobs I had. And so you still had that person you could lean on to kind of get you going. But at the end of the day, it's really a team and the partnership that you have there that really helps take the organization and continue to move the ball forward.
So, the military is like a really highly structured environment, and the private sector is much less so. And so I think some of our leadership style kind of has to change based on where you're at, who you're leading.
Yeah.
And for me, it was I had to use a lot less sarcasm. It played well in uniform, but it was lost in some of the civilians who were taking me way too seriously. And so I had to adjust my language a little bit. But I think every leader who comes out of the military and has to or gets the opportunity then to lead in the civilian world has to make some adjustments. Did you have to make any adjustments, or were you already leading in a way that was effective with civilians?
Well, I think again, I was blessed to have more than a couple, probably more than the average Army Corps assignments, which is still part of the Army, but you're really just the one green suit guy leading a whole bunch of civilians. So that gave me an opportunity to kind of ease up some of the harsh military leadership and responsibilities that I had and work a lot with civilians. And so I think the transition probably was a little bit easier in that way because I was used to doing that. But there's still a lot of protocols and things that the military does that even the civilian workforce is just attuned to and accustomed to, that isn't the case out in the private sector or even at a public sector where I worked at the city of Mobile. Now, I will say that fortunately, the mayor I worked for, he hired a lot of prior military service guys, so he knew, and they, as you find in the private and public sector, a lot of folks are comfortable with people that have a military background because they have all that discipline, they have that leadership, they have that training. And so he was accustomed to it, and I think a lot of the others were. But again, you've got to fine tune your leadership style to the audience and to the group that you're working with. And I think that's a key at every job that I've had and will continue to have with all the clients I have going forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You've got to make those adjustments and see how people are responding to your leadership, and so that takes some external self-awareness. You have to understand how you're being perceived by others. But I also think in the military, there's a sense of purpose that's easy to tap into for leaders. You get those squad leaders or team leaders or individual soldiers, and they know why they're there, right. Particularly when you're on a mission that they believe in. Sometimes it's difficult to motivate civilians in the same way because they don't see that connection with purpose within their companies.
Right.
And I'm thinking specifically at the public works in the city of Mobile where you worked. They have a sense of service because they're serving their community, but do they have the same connection with it that you saw in the military?
Yeah, no, they absolutely didn't. I mean, I'll be honest. It was when the mayor asked me to come do that job, and I come in. It was really a group of kind of, I would say, I'll use the term broken departments. They weren't broken to the point that they weren't functioning, although some of them were barely functioning. They didn't have a plan or a strategic plan or vision for what they were doing. And there was also no unity or kind of cohesion. There was no esprit de corps. There was no kind of unit cohesion that you would expect in an organization. So, you had to really start at the fundamentals with that and come in and say, what's our mission? What are our vision? What are our values? What are the values that we're going to live by? The military did a great job of, values. We used to have the little values card or dog tag. And so we came up with a cool little acronym: sports, safety, number one, professionalism, open communication, respect, teamwork, and service. And so service, as you just mentioned, was the last one. But that sports acronym was easy to remember, and it really gave folks kind of, hey, this is what we're doing, and kind of, unifying everyone behind that. But leadership traits, span, whether it's military or private or public. It's leading by example. It's the presence, being present, being out there, being with the folks, and taking care of your people, whether they're soldiers, sailors, airmen, or whether they're, folks out in the public works department that are working at Parks and Rec, or they're picking up your trash or garbage, or they're fixing a street, or your contractors. They have to understand that, hey, you're there and you're going to be there to help guide them. And so that presence is important, that leading by example is important. And I could go on, and I'm happy to give you lots of examples. But I would tell you, Bob, even things as simple that we took for granted in the military, like uniform, having uniforms and being uniform and stuff. We had departments that had been requesting new shirts and new, uniforms, hadn't gotten them for years, and it was like, how could these guys, so they're kind of, ragtag and wearing their own stuff and private gear and not the stuff they should be wearing to be uniform and be proud of their organization. So it's branding everything, using the city brand that already existed on the uniforms, making sure everyone had the uniforms, hard hats that were uniform. We took the Corps example and, had brand new hard hats made for every employee that had any job that would be out in the field. Getting the right equipment, having new serviceable equipment, trucks, tools. You go down and you see these trucks that are deplorable, and you're saying, so it didn't take much to be able to point out to the mayor or to the city council, hey, if you really want to have high quality services and you really want to have a good city, we've got to invest in these people. And so the leadership role is really assessing what you got out there, finding those things that need to be improved, and getting after it.
Those are so incredibly important, and there's three things that come to mind just from the hard hat conversation, right? Just from that, it's a token, right? Is it important that people wear hard hats? Yeah, so we're all in favor of safety gear, okay? Right. But it's more than that, right? It's about a culture. It's about professionalism, right? And it's about a sense of belonging.
Yep.
Like on the day in basic training when the trainees become soldiers, on that day when they earn their beret, when they get to, they have this, I now belong to something bigger. And you don't have to go through a crucible event like basic training to earn this sense of belonging, and for leaders to instill that sense of belonging for people.
Right.
And it's something as simple as matching hard hats. It's just something as simple as, you don't get to just, or you don't have to go down to Walmart and pick up your own safety vest. We're going to give you one, and it's going to be embroidered with the city logo on it, right? And maybe your name, right. And those things, they may seem like trinkets to some people, but I tell you, everywhere that I went, I made sure we had a unit hat, we had a unit T-shirt, and if people wanted to purchase a polo with our insignia embroidered in it, they could, and they did.
Yeah. Well,
because they felt like they belonged to it.
Yeah, and to your point, Bob, I mean, so a couple things. Number one, it didn't take much to just say, hey, go look at all the other utility companies. Go look at what Alabama Power Southern Company, how they operate, what they're in. Go look at AT&T. When they park their truck, how do they do it? What do they have on? And so you see what right looks like, and it's not hard to be able to show them that. But even to your point that the polo or so what happened was a lot of time I spent a lot of time saying, hey, we've got to get this, particularly for the field folks, but then the office staff, interestingly, those inside the city hall that were the engineers or the real estate folks or other folks, project managers, they're saying, well, geez, we kind of want a embroidered thing too, we want to be part of the team. Like we knew we're part of the team, but they didn't have that thing, right? So then it was, okay, hey, let's get, just as you pointed out, polos or, Oxford shirt or whatever they want to have. And then they can have that. So when I did twice a year, all hands meetings where I brought all, 800 people into one room and addressed them all. So I had from the lowest, grade to my, deputy, and they got to hear from me and ask me questions directly, but everyone would wear their uniform. And it really felt a sense of team when they were together. And that's, I think the leadership lesson in that is starting with the basics, establishing that mission, vision, values of, we're all coalescing, but then having those things that they can coalesce around that team. And it was really satisfying to see that. And one of the big ones we worked on was accreditation, is getting accredited. And that, public works entities or agencies have an opportunity to join the American Public Works Association and get their accreditation, which is, kind of like a university's accredited or a hospital's accredited, and so it's a professional, qualification. And we focused on that. Candidly, the mayor initially was saying, it was during COVID, and he said, Jim, there's a lot going on with COVID and all this other stuff. You may want to wait. So we did pause for a year, but I told him, I said, Mayor, look, we've really got to do this because this gives something for us to achieve as a team. But more importantly, it got all those systems in place and things that would be enduring after I left. And we did achieve it. We were the first public works agency in the state of Alabama. And there's only like 2 or 3% in North America that are accredited agencies. And so really proud of that. But it was really proud of what the team did. And all those things we've been discussing were really things that you had to do to get there. A whole bunch of other things too, but leading the team to.
Well, what kind of obstacles? I mean, that's not easy to do. I mean, you've got, and I'm guessing here that some of your senior leaders said, "Boy, that seems like a lot of work," and I'm not really sure it's worth the squeeze. You probably had a few folks that said, "Well, I guess we could do this, but there's a bunch of other stuff I won't get done because I'm focused on this."
Right. Yeah, for sure. And the leadership challenge in that is saying, "Hey, look. We're going to do this, and it's going to be a little extra work, particularly for the, directors and things where there's a lot more administrative. But I tried to make sure they understood I wasn't going to try and add a burden to them. One thing we had to do is I had to get someone who is fully dedicated to just managing the process of that, getting the paperwork done. And so we did have to promote someone into a position to be the accreditation manager. So there was an investment. It's an investment too. You got to be able to invest. But I constantly reminded, and we constantly reminded everyone that we're all doing this together and that we're all going to reap the benefit together. And it's not necessarily the benefit of just having the little new badge to put on your uniform or truck saying you're an accredited organization, which is cool. But also it's about having things in place and a new standard that you have within your organization. And anyway, it was a heavy lift, but getting there and seeing the success and the pride that everyone had at the end and throughout the process was really rewarding. And I think for any organization, whether it's public or private, I think that's really important. I think people, you look at Elon Musk and SpaceX, those folks are driven by a mission to achieve, getting someone to Mars and getting a rocket to Mars, right? And they're driven by a great leader who's there and is present, and he sleeps on assembly lines at Tesla and he's out there and doing stuff, right? That leadership presence is important in leading by example, but they're all coalescing behind that mission and that thing that they're trying to do. And it's the same thing in whatever. So whether it's a private or public, you're really have the same focus.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the sense of belonging that you create from overcoming something as difficult as applying for accreditation, and I see this even with major award efforts, right? If you apply to be the small business of the year in a metropolitan area, as one of my clients just did, and it took months of effort. The interesting thing about that, not just that they won, which I'm super proud of, that one of my client companies has won that, but it was also about the things that they had to do to compete were things that were making them better,
right,
as a company, as a team. It was oh my gosh, this is a lot of work. Well, let's roll up our sleeves, and the whole impetus behind the getting the award had nothing to do with making the organization more cohesive, but that was the effect it had.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is a fantastic lesson. And we see it sometimes in the military when we have Ishner Awards or Sturgis Awards. Right. Those are unit awards or individual awards that people apply for.
Blast from the past.
But it's really remarkable what it does to the team when you go after something big like that, and how it coalesces. And you can't, I think it's difficult to overstate how important that sense of teamwork is,
right,
and how much better the teamwork seems to be after accomplishing something big like that.
Well, and it's contagious, right? I mean, if you mentioned the Ishner Sturgis, right? I mean, it's a blast from the past, something I probably would have never remembered. And I think we were the Ishner. We didn't win the final. We won the 18th Airborne Corps, something like that. But at any rate, it's the same kind of thing. But it's contagious in the point that when other municipalities around us started to hear that we were doing it and we were pretty far down the road, then the one on the other side of the bay, Daphne, Alabama, said, well, geez, we want to do that too. I had, Birmingham and Montgomery, were, kind of chomping at the bit to do it and, didn't want Mobile to be the first, but we were, to get it. And so it kind of raises everyone, right, together. And so now all the other organizations around you, cities around you are now saying, well, we don't want to be, we don't want to be the one that doesn't have that. We want to have it too, and we want to be just as good or look just as good. So it's kind of that competition, just like when you were a company commander and your fellow companies competing for the Ishner gets it. You don't want to be the one that's the slacker unit. So you want to elevate. It elevates everyone in that, all the companies in that battalion. Then that battalion's good, and then the brigade's good, and then the division's good. So I think it continues to raise everyone.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that the competition aspect of that is incredibly important. I think it works in the opposite as well, as if you have a dirtbag unit and nothing ever happens to them, they get the same benefits as everybody else. Then other people like, well, why are we working so hard?
Yeah. Well,
so I feel like it's incumbent on the leader to make sure it's a positive reinforcing thing.
That's right. Yeah, no doubt. And good leaders are, quickly identify that may have a dirtbag unit. They want to get in and fix it, and don't want to be the dirtbag unit. So, or organization or company. And so I can only imagine. I'm really follow the stuff that Elon Musk is doing with his companies. I'm really enamored by kind of all of the developments in the way he pushes things. And candidly, I see a lot of traits that he has are things that I've had over my time, but didn't really realize. But it's driving and pushing people beyond their kind of what they would think they could normally do, right? So it's setting a goal that may seem like no way we're going to get this done. Hey, we're going to get this accreditation in 12 months, and most people take 2 or 3 years. Well, there's no way we're going to get that done, or we're going to build this project in 6 months, and normally it would take a year, and there's no way that could be done in 6 months. Well, it can be. You just have to be able to apply the resources and be focused and have a good plan and get all the things and get all the resources you need to do that. So I think Elon Musk with SpaceX, Tesla, pick the company he's leading, is XAI that he's doing, all these things that he's doing. He's setting a goal to achieve something as a leader, as the senior leader in that organization, which is unheard of in terms of timeline, right? But then he's pushing his folks, and he's got that presence, and he's getting them the resources, and he's making sure they have it. But they're not building these factories and building these rockets and doing these things, without guys working 24/7 to make it happen. And yeah, they have the resources to pay for it, but it's the leader driving that, setting that goal. And I think whether it's private sector doing that, or whether it's, like I said, in the public service doing it, setting the goal, you've got to be able to do that. So I think that's something also that I probably, as a leader, I probably give my folks bigger challenge than they probably would like, in terms of, a suspense or timeline, whether you're building something or trying to achieve something. But at the end, when you get it, they say, wow, we never thought we would do that. And I think that's also important. If you give them way too much, rope or too much lead time there, then, like anything in school, everyone will procrastinate to the end and then, cram at the end. But I think it's better to try and press on these things.
Yeah, I think you're right. That they will take as much time as you give them, right? People will naturally do that. But one of the things that there's actually two pieces that I want to pull from that. One is about innovation, because you've always been an advocate for innovation, particularly when you were in government service. I still recall sitting in a plenary session at a big conference that we were at, and the innovation leader at the Corps of Engineers is saying, hey, we've been working really hard on innovating and bringing some new technology to the field, and here it is. And they unveiled a QR code, which was probably a 3-year-old technology at the time. And there was a lot of people in the room who had never seen a QR code before, in fairness. And they were thinking, wow, look, if I just point my phone camera at it, takes me to a website. And they were like, ooh, look at this. And you stood up in the middle of this room of professionals and you called out the senior leader. You're like, you've been working for years on innovating, and this is what we've got. Are you kidding me?
Right.
And I think people were floored by that. But I think that was kind of the seeds of what you're talking about, of pushing for innovation rather than just being a late adopter for something and calling innovation.
Yeah.
And I think in public service, that is a difficult thing to do, is to be an early adopter or a complete innovator in itself, because the incentives aren't there.
Right. Well, I mean,
Musk has a lot of incentives to push the envelope.
Financially, but maybe to the U.S. government's credit, right? They realize NASA, but haven't fully realized it, right? We'll stick on that theme, is that, geez, we were taking forever to do things. It's ridiculously expensive. And they realize, we probably need to get the private sector, out there working on this stuff. And so, there's multiple entities doing it. He happens to be the most successful with SpaceX, but there's Blue Origin, there's all these other companies, right, that are doing things. And they're doing these at way faster and way cheaper rates in which the federal government and public sector can. So, I think that's been really good in that area, and it drives the innovation quicker. And to that point, I just read an article, I think this morning or yesterday, that, Trump is looking at, canceling the SLS, the Standard Launch System rocket, which I worked on a project here in Huntsville, Alabama with the Corps. We built the test stand for the SLS rocket up in Huntsville. But it's, drastically over budget, years behind. And it's basically the same thing that Musk is doing. So, he's saying, well, we may cancel that program. And now there's implications to that are, well, is he doing it just because, Elon Musk is his friend and all this other business? But I would say that's probably not the case. I remember working in the Army's in the Pentagon, and there was the Force 21 or the program, and they had all these new systems, new tank, new truck, new radios, new everything. And every year they would cancel another program, right? And then finally it got down to the only thing left was like the soldier. Well, you can't cancel the soldier, right? You still need him. And he had like some new gear. But all these other programs just got so drastically bloated and behind schedule. So, they want to say, hey, we just got to cancel this thing. They did the same thing with the presidential helicopter in 2008 and 2009. They had to cancel that, and then they brought it back. They ultimately needed it. So I think it's, that leader can identify, but really gives the suspense, keeps people on that timeline. It's all, controlling budget, doing all these things, but driving the folk, having a focus on this and having the people coalesce behind it to really have that vision and getting there to deliver whatever that is your company's doing or you're trying to get after, not just letting it just kind of ride along, because then things just become decades behind schedule and huge cost increase.
Yeah, I think there's some obstacles that the federal government has that other entities don't really suffer from or not intentionally suffer from. And that has to do with values, right? Obviously, anything that Musk is involved with, the number one value is innovation. And if you've got a great idea and we can make it into a reality, we're going to put resources behind it and go make that a reality.
Right.
And if he doesn't have those resources, he'll go find them.
Yeah.
Right? But in the government, this may not be a popular view because we have espoused values, but the real value is about fairness. Mm-hmm. It's about justice. And to be fair to everybody in the contracting world means that you give everybody the same opportunities as everybody else. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to lead to innovation. What that's going to lead to is stagnation over the years, because everybody has to be able to put their good idea on the Bradley. Right. Everybody's got to put their good idea on the Comanche. And these are programs that end up getting either bloated and you end up with something that doesn't even resemble what the original purpose was, or it gets canceled as you spoke about. But I think it's from that value of, well, everybody has to have their piece.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think, again, I look at, I was on Capitol Hill working in the 2008 timeframe when they canceled multiple programs. They canceled the Joint Airborne Laser Program. They canceled the presidential helicopter. I told you about the Force 21 stuff, canceled all those things. Trying to control budget and do all that stuff. But, good leaders, and I'm sure Elon Musk has a lot of bad traits too, but his one good trait is, I would tell you, is that he's able to deliver on something, and meet a timeline and be successful on that. But, his whole thing is, delete, I don't know if you've read his book, but, it's delete everything down to the point that you've over deleted, right? So you've deleted things off of that and you've got it really lean, really light to the point that like it caused some other problem that it wasn't able to function as its primary purpose. So it's not adding things onto the thing because I got to have that in there. He's like, no. We got to streamline and get it down to the bare. What is the bare minimum we need? What's the bare minimum thickness of that metal? What's the bare minimum thing we got to have to make this happen? Not over engineering, over designing, because we're trying to meet these historical kind of requirements for extra safety and all this business. He's saying, no. We're going to get it down to the very edge, and maybe even go a little too far, cut too much, and then bring it back. He said, you want to overcut and then bring back, 10%. I would tell you the federal government's the exact opposite. The Standard Launch System rocket, just the test stand we built alone for that thing was way over-engineered, right? It's like, this is just a test stand to push on this thing. He's not doing that. He's just building the thing. and then let's fire and see what happens. If it makes it, awesome. If it doesn't, well then, we got to make it a little thicker, a little stronger.
So what goes through my mind in that conversation there is the Doolittle raid, and it's like, okay, let's take everything we possibly can out of these bombers so that they can make the distance,
right,
to the point where they're taking armament off of it.
Right.
They're like, well, look, distance is more important, so that's where we're going to end up. Then.
But it's about the leader's vision and focus on that, and that's the thing. It's not just that, it's the leader given that vision, and that's where the leadership, I think, trait is, because some people, right, people will push against that hard. Your engineers may push against that, your other people, but the leader's got to go, no, we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to get there. That's the leadership challenge.
Well, I think that's something that we do talk about in the military quite a bit, is managing risk. This is what commanders do, is they manage risk. And I don't think leaders in many private sector organizations consider that as a primary duty of the person in charge. And when you're over-engineering something, you're trying to reduce risk to roughly zero, right? Or as small as you possibly can. Whereas when you're talking about innovation, if you're not willing to take those risks, you're never going to do anything that's interesting.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so it could be, we're talking about space and rockets, or it can be something you're doing. We talked about public works, or it could be whatever your company's doing. You could just, continue to just do the thing and, plug along, or you can, take some risk and mitigate the risk you can, but you're going to have some risk and, move to the next level product, or, develop something new, or make the thing you have more lean in some way to be able to, do it better, cheaper, faster than the competitors. So I think, as a consultant, I think that's, part of that, you have to carry that same kind of mindset into as a consultant, and how you're working with other folks in their business and advising them about things. Of course, knowing that as a consultant, right, it's not your thing, it's their thing, and you're trying to help get them to accept those, realities, and realizing that they're taking the actual risk and it's not yours. You're just kind of helping, trying to guide them.
That's kind of the easy part of the consultant is you're like, okay, this is going to be really risky. If it doesn't go well, sorry, it's not my risk. I guess you can cancel my contract, but it's your company. So helping people understand the nature of the risk that they're going through, and the costs of mitigation.
Yeah.
And I always, you can mitigate risk to roughly zero. And we talk about during COVID, New Zealand did a pretty good job of reducing their risk to roughly zero. They just wouldn't let anybody on the island. You can't come or go. You're stuck. We're just a complete isolation. And their incidence rates early on were
really low,
way lower than anybody else's. Right? They did a fantastic job. But there's a cost, and their economy imploded.
Right.
So you can reduce risk to zero,
yeah,
but there's a cost to doing that. And that's an extreme example. But we say within our businesses, well, okay. And you do advising on risk reduction for disaster response.
Sure.
In your consulting business. You can make yourself waterproof.
Right.
You can live in a flood zone and be completely waterproof, but it's going to cost you.
That's right.
And it's going to cost you in terms of finances. It's going to cost you in terms of operability.
Right. Well, yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so to that point, of course, the federal government, FEMA, is putting a lot of rules, regulations, and things in place for cities and municipalities to have certain requirements in place to meet insurance goals and other things. So one of the things they talk about is freeboard, amount of feet above kind of your flood plain in new construction, and there's a cost to that, right? So if you're a city planner and you're trying to say, okay, hey, we're going to put this in place, and we're going to have 2 feet or 3 feet of freeboard space where, you're not having new construction that's automatically sitting in the flood zone. There's a cost to that. Developers and real estate folks don't necessarily want to spend that money doing that. That's not a great investment, because you have to do other things. But if you don't, what's the cost on the back end for the city, and what's the cost for the developer or the real estate, or folks that have that property. So some cities are a lot more progressive in that. I think the city, if I remember right, the city of Miami added in several feet to theirs because they said, hey, look, we're down here and we're constantly getting flooded. I'm sure Charleston is doing the same. City of Mobile took out the little bit of freeboard they had. It's based on some political pressures and other things. But I would just say that it's that's a challenge. That's something you have to fight against, and it's all about risk. What's the risk? Are you willing to risk a city facility or a new development to say they're going to maybe not spend a little money now, but could have a big problem later on, with sea level rise and hurricane prone zones and flood zones. So you really have to kind of look at that and balance that. And you can advise folks and say, I think, we should do this, or, whether if you don't, here's the challenge. So that's just one example of that. There's lots you could go down in that world. Having spent time in Puerto Rico, doing the recovery down there, how do you harden things to survive these storms that keep wiping things out? What do? You bury all the infrastructure? What's the risk if you don't? What's the cost if you do it? And then what's the risk if you don't? You got to balance that.
Yeah, I think there's some hope in the world out there of managing risk in a better way. And one of the things that comes to mind is some of the larger petroleum companies are building new facilities in a way that is ecologically friendly. They're super clean. They are making sure that rules and regulations are followed to a T, right, to make sure that there's roughly zero chance of spillage, and if there is, it's immediately contained. And they're following all that. They're over-engineering these things. And people would ask them why. It's like, that's a waste of money. You don't need to do that. And they're like, no, the cost of cleanup is greater than what we're spending on this. Right. The cost of regulatory non-compliance is greater than what we're spending on this. So let's take the rules and exceed it by 20%. Right. And then we'll never pay that fine, and we'll never have to do a cleanup. And in the long run, we're going to have a more profitable business, even though it cost us more to start up in this location.
That's right.
So that gives me hope that there are some long-term thinkers out there that are willing to take upfront costs to mitigate long-term risks.
Yeah, and some of it could be driven by, their insurance companies or investors or regulatory things that are out there, and they don't necessarily have an option, right? They're doing it because they have to meet these things. But I think good leaders can look at that and identify that without being forced in one way or the other, and have the vision to go, no, it's better. Your ROI on this thing is a lot better doing it now than we are letting it go, and then 5 or 10 years from now having to go back and correct something or have that risk. And so, yeah, it's all a balancing. And when you're consulting and talking to folks about it, whatever it is, I always tell folks, if we're helping folks and competing for grants, or we're doing something, hey, look, there's no guarantee we're going to get this. We're going to spend some time and effort going through this. But the alternative is you don't do it, and you have no chance of getting it. So, it's one of those things where, what's the return on this investment? And I think, folks realize that there's probably, they may be afraid if they haven't done federal work, for example. They've just been doing all private sector work, and now they want to put their foot in the federal work. Well, there's a lot of work involved with that. There's an investment involved with that, but the reward can be pretty good. You can have, when there's a trough in the public sector of an economy, your federal stuff may keep going, and that may carry you, which a lot of businesses see. So the long-term reward is probably worth it. So it's really kind of coaching folks through that and telling them where the risk is, but also, and the cost is, but what the value can be on the back end. Yeah.
So in your consulting business, I know that you end up doing a lot of executive coaching, but you also do consulting. And I think we distinguish the two. The coaching is where you're helping that leader internalize those principles that you're teaching them, and then they get to take action on them, versus the consulting where you tend to do some of the work yourself while you're coaching. What do you spend more time doing? Is it coaching, or is it consulting?
I would say it's probably a bit of a balance between the two, honestly. Probably a little more coaching than consulting, but in the early stages, in the terms of this business, I've been at it, about a year, coming up in a year. So not a long track record on it, but, enough different kinds of clients and customers that, the coaching is really important, because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to kind of justify, they're bringing you on for some reason, right? They need help doing something. So the coaching / educating about certain things, I've had clients who haven't done work in the U.S. and don't understand the regulatory processes and all the things that are in there. Part of it's just, I'd say less maybe coaching, but also education, right? About, well, Hank, there's a lot of things in place we got to go through, a lot of hoops we got to go through. Are you prepared for that? And if so, then, hey, let's proceed. If you're not, well, then, maybe we need to rethink strategy about how we're trying to do this. And then the true consulting, where you're kind of doing some of the work to kind of take off the burden, where they don't want to maybe hire someone full time or take off the burden of that entity. There's some of that. I personally do a little less of that, just because you got to have a pretty good team to be able to step in and do that. Maybe I'll do more of that in the future, but there's no doubt some of that you have to do along the way.
So what my leadership model at Five Eagles, when we talk about how to coach leaders, is you have to be able to lead in 3 domains. You're going to have to be able to lead yourself, then you have to be able to lead others, and then you have to be able to lead organizations. Right? That's not new or novel, but it's an important distinction that a lot of leaders haven't thought about. Mm-hmm. So in the world of leading yourself, Jim, we have to constantly improve in a changing world, right? If we're not learning, if we're not keeping on top of our game, we're going backwards then compared to our competition. So what do you do, Jim, to stay on top of your game and to make sure that as things change, you are staying in the forefront?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things I do is I read a lot. I also pay attention to a lot of things out there in the news and social media stuff, to include YouTube's, all these other things, to really try and stay current and relevant with some of the technologies. I mean, a great one is all this development with AI. When I left the federal sector, the AI wasn't really a thing. I mean, as it is today. I mean, there was things that were probably AI-ish, but they weren't like that. And it's really been kind of exploding in the last couple of years. And so, kind of digging into that and doing some self-education on those things, and how can I use this tool? How can this tool be valuable not only to me but to clients? To me and my business, but to clients. And are they using it? Could they be using it? How could they use it? Those are kind of things. So I think I spend time trying to stay current and relevant in all the things that are going on and some of the technologies, probably more tech, hence the QR code, more tech heavy than maybe others. Or at least have an interest in it. I'm not saying I definitely have areas I can improve more in. I could definitely do more self-development reading and other things, but I think that's some of what I do, because like you said, you can't just rely on, geez, I got 30 years experience. Yeah, but a lot of it's pretty dated. A lot of it isn't, necessarily, it's good leadership, but it's not necessarily the same way they're doing things today. So I think that's one of the big things I do. And I will tell you, the AI thing's super exciting. I mean, it is a combat multiplier for sure. And utilizing that in all kinds of areas to really help anyone and any entity just become better. It's not about in my opinion, it's not about a shortcut. It's about really being more effective in what you're doing, to do things like meet a shorter time frame. We don't have to spend as long doing that. Things that I may have spent half a day doing research on, I can plug the thing in and get the information in 5 seconds.
I don't have to have a whole team of analysts if my AI can run the analysis for me in real time. It's actually cheaper. I think AI augmented leaders are a game changer if we're willing to figure out how to use the tool. And if we're just using it to write our emails for us, we're missing the boat. There's so much more out there.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I'm sure that you, over the last 3 decades as a leader, that you have mentored a lot of young leaders, both in uniform and out of uniform. And I suspect that there are senior leaders and junior leaders that have sought your advice over the years. So what practical advice would you offer to an aspiring leader who's going into their first role as a leader?
Well, I think, no matter what that, where you are in your career, if you're stepping into a leadership role, I had two brothers in the Air Force, and I always joke the first time they were really a leader was when they were a squadron commander, right? Which is lieutenant colonel, um, '05, where in the Army, you're platoon leader or company commander, but they don't get it till they're in '05. They're just flying planes and staff officers. So, if you're a fighter pilot, you're responsible for one person. And that's not entirely true. I mean, I'll get lots of feedback on this, I'm sure, from the Air Force and Air Force pilots. But I just say that they got their first real dose of big leadership when they were a squadron commander. You could be a great engineer in an organization for many, many years, and then all of a sudden you're in charge of the engineering department. Well, what did that company do to help you, become a leader? So I think, part of it is personally seeking out education, professional education, and leadership things as you can go. I think that's important. If your company's not doing it or your business isn't doing it, trying to do that. If you're the company owner or team, then providing that for your employees. That's something I work with some clients on is helping develop programs and making sure they're investing in the employee and they're doing some leadership development along the way so that when they have that star and they put them in that position, they're successful. And whether it's as a director or a vice president or president of the company, you just don't want to thrust them into the position. And so, you may have spent 20 years and all of a sudden now you're a leader. You're being asked to be a leader. And I would tell you, I mean, some do it, can jump into it and do it well, but many fail, candidly. I had, folks who were, basically, step above laborers, and then, all of a sudden they're a team leader. And they fail. We had one who voluntarily took the demotion back to the other position because they said, I just can't do this, right? And so I would say do the education and seek that out. But the company also has to do their part. The other piece I'd say, Bob, is that I always tell folks, no matter what your job you're in, is just do your job and do it really well, whatever that is. That's not necessarily great, I'd say, per se leadership, but it's great, I think, life advice in terms of that job you're in. Don't be worried about the promotion. Don't be worried about all these other things. Whatever job you're assigned or in, do it to your very, very best. And your superiors will see that, geez, this person's really giving it 110%. And you'll naturally get promoted to increasing level of responsibility. And that will come with other rewards of success and probably pay increases, all those other things. So, that's something I always tell any person who's, going into any job at any level is, where they may be nervous or unsure. I said, just do your job, do it the very best. Don't be worried about the next job or or that, thing, because that'll come with good performance in there. So, but anyway, those are a couple of things that I'd probably point out.
I love it. Jim, you've talked about a lot of great things. Let me see if I could summarize a couple of these. It's essential for leaders to have a person to lean on and learn from. You need to lead by example. You need to have presence. You need to professionalize your organization. You got to take care of troops. You have to create the culture where it has a sense of belonging. And finally, do your job well. Yeah. Seek challenges, develop yourself, but above all, do your job and do it well.
Yep, for sure.
How'd I do?
Awesome.
Jim, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I always enjoy our conversations, and I know my audience is going to get a lot out of listening to you and the leadership journey that you've had over the last 3 decades and what you do now for your clients and what your lasting legacy, both in the Mobile district of the Corps of Engineers and in the city of Mobile as a public works director. Those legacies live on because you improved those organizations while you were there, and I'm sure the echoes of your footsteps are still sounding. So thanks again for being here, man.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Appreciate what you're doing in Five Eagles, and look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Awesome. Cheers.
All right. Take care.